Let's take a look at your market news now. Asian markets were mixed on Wednesday, but the euro staged a mild recovery on hopes that the European Union and Italy can ease a row over trade issues. Now, the China-US trade spat is continuing. Perhaps we're just going to go to the US markets. My apology about that. US stocks fell on Friday on the back of continuing tensions and escalations of trade wars between the world's two largest economies. The S&P 500 dropped as much as 1.3% after comments from US President Donald Trump that if a meeting on trade didn't happen with China next month, that would be okay or fine. Now, if you step back a bit, you'll see that the numbers for the S&P 500 was the worst plunge of the year for the S&P 500, as well as the best day in months. Now, for the week, the Dow lost 0.8%, the S&P 500 erased 0.5%, and the Nasdaq was down 0.6%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 90.75 or 0.3% to 26,287, and the Nasdaq lost 1% to end at 7,959 points. Let's go to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange now, where my colleague Viv Govender is standing by. Viv, a very good afternoon to you. What's taking place in the markets today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Zinga. Well, it's pretty much a flat market stance if one was to really take a look at it. The market itself sitting just barely higher at this point in time. Now, we did have a mixed picture, as you noted out as well, out in Asia as well, and it was negative to end the week off as well, however, in the United States last week, Friday. Quite a few fears raging around, and a lot of that based on Donald Trump saying that he may even cancel the talks that were scheduled with China for September. Now, if that does happen, of course, that does mean the market itself does not necessarily see itself getting some sort of resolution with those China-US trade conversations. And just also to note out that Goldman Sachs has come out and said that the risk of a recession, that being a global recession, is certainly being heightened by this trade war, and that they don't actually see a solution to this trade war or deal being signed any time between now and that US presidential election, which happens in 2020, next year in November, that is, of 2020. So certainly interesting how things are perhaps turning slightly negative when it comes to that front. Of course, this week economically, the big data point will be retail sales. What does that mean for GDP? It may offer some hope. It may offer some light. But for now, let's unpack the market and see exactly how the numbers are faring out in Europe and locally. And we'll get into the details in just a bit. Well, as you can tell, the market there sitting in a slightly negative territory, not necessarily any major good pictures as well out of that market picture. Let's chat now to Viv Govender, then coming from Rand Swiss live here at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Viv, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for it. Just slightly up for the JSE, nothing really to really shape things about. What is it that you see is sort of shaping the market right now?
The Rand. 100% the Rand.
Yeah.
We're sitting at 1542 at the moment.
Yeah.
We're going to say, used to say 15 now, it's not 14 or I think 13 like it was a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
So the movement, I mean, look at it. We're talking a few days ago, we were sitting low 14s, even late 13s.
Yeah.
Now we are mid 15. That's a movement of 10% effectively in a period of a week or so. That impact is going to feed through to, as you can see, the Goldfield, the Anglo Golds and so on, the Nepis, all these things have offshore allocations.
Banking stocks.
Yeah. Under a huge amount of upward pressure because of the weaker currency, giving them a bit of a support. But locally based things, the banking stocks happening there, the Discoveries, the Aspens under pressure. Of course, Discovery and Aspen we can talk about in a second. The NHI debate happening with those, and more details coming out. It does seem that the government's going to push through the NHI reasonably soon. We're talking less than a decade.
Yeah.
And the implications it's going to have for the South African healthcare sector as well as the South African public as a whole. It's going to be gigantic.
Yeah. We'll unpack that one just a bit. I want to really focus on that Rand picture for now as well. More than 1% lost just today.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big move. What exactly is moving the Rand in its directions?
Okay, look, I mean, we saw a huge amount of, optimism and a move from about what's it, about 15 some change, back to about 1390, 1380. But in the last week or so, we've had more global uncertainty. We have this stuff happening in Hong Kong at the moment, where that those protests seem to have gone from bad to worse. We talked about the fact that the airport, Hong Kong airport, international flights are barred now at the moment. Apparently there's Chinese army troops moving into Hong Kong. When the announcement came about that flights out of Hong Kong were being banned, we saw even the U.S. stock futures being affected negatively by that. So that's obviously a negative thing. Global uncertainty, of course. It was the chance of recession dramatically higher than it was even like a month or so ago in terms of people's perceptions. You know how quickly the U.S. Fed changed its its outlook from raising rates to cutting rates. It was dramatic. So we are seeing that concern coming through as well. We've seen real big reactions happening with iron ore prices fallen dramatically in the last month or so. Commodities under huge amount of pressure. It's not all commodities, but the industrial ones. But then again, we see the precious metals being supported quite dramatically. Gold prices going above 1,500 again because of uncertainty. So all these factors seem to be negative for emerging currencies, especially for the rand.
Yeah, so gold taking on the mantle then of a safe haven right now, right? And how does that sort of sit with the rest of the market? I mean, that just pushes that price higher. It has remained a safe haven for quite some time. Do we see it perhaps staying around those levels, or does it push even higher as well?
It depends. Look, there's two kinds of trade happening with gold, but I call the hate trade and the love trade, the fear trade and love trade. The love trade is people buying gold for because the joy of having gold.
Yeah.
A lot of it driven by Asia, China, India, big buyers of gold for jewelry and so on. And if you have uncertainty, that's going to be taken away. But the hate trade, is the fear trade, let me say rather, is the trade where you want to have gold for the safe haven thing, and that's actually taking over. It's called I think demand at the moment. So if you see increased inflation out there, we see more concerns about currencies. We might see gold go higher. But I want to warn people. Look at 2008, 2009, when the market really crashed. Gold did not stay up above 1,000. It fell quite dramatically as well. Yeah. So the safe haven status of gold, I think, is overstated. Dollars maybe are much safer than in gold.
So a short-term play,
short-term
so
play, always.
As a safe haven, just to keep your money in there for now, and then get back.
But true safe haven, get some dollars.
Yeah, well, that certainly points to that picture. Let's talk about then the equity front, and one of the big fallers, the likes of Aspen, the likes of Discovery being hammered there as well. And you say perhaps NHI coming into play here.
Aspen, I think, had some bad news because they were one of the companies linked up with the whole Cyril Ramaphosa funding scandal. Yeah. The amount of money being talked about was quite tiny. We're talking about 200,000 rands, if I can remember.
Sure.
Especially when you remember there was somebody out there, I think, with 120 million rand, as an anonymous donation, and people individuals for instance, Mariana was putting in about, $1 million, even though she wasn't at ABSA or she's no longer at ABSA, that kind of stuff. There is linkages happening there. So I think that may be negative, but I think Discovery coming down as well. I think the NHI is of concern. I do think that there's no... I saw things on Twitter. Has any actuarial, scientists looked at these numbers and tried to come up with, are they real or not? It does seem to me that the NHI is a funding mechanism. It's not a health system. Yeah. They're looking at a way to fund what they want to do, as opposed to saying this is the plan. From what I gather, the pilot projects have been incredibly badly received. They have not done what they should be doing. And, the way it's probably going to be coming through to you and I is as income tax increases. They talked about, the fact that, it's going to be taking away, the public sector or the private sector, medical aids. If you basically paid for medical aid and you weren't getting medical aid kind of, benefits, you wouldn't pay. The only way to do this is a link-up tax increase. And for the higher taxing payers out there, it's 45% already. What are they going to push up to, 55, 50?
What does that mean, however, for medical aids, for private medical aids in particular? Does it change the way we see the system as it works right now?
Oh, yeah, most certainly. I mean, the way that it's envisioned by government when it's fully implemented is that the medical aids will not be able to offer services offered by the NHI. So you basically could not go and buy a medical aid and say, I don't want to go to use the NHI to do doctor's visits and so on. You have to use the NHI for that. There's even talk that it's possible that you may not be able to pay to see specialists on your own.
Sure.
So if you had money in your pocket and say, I want to go see this guy here because I do believe that I have a heart condition or a brain condition or something that I think is going to kill me, and it takes forever to wait for the NHI to do what it needs to do, you could not pay for that. And I think that's actually something that's going to be very negative for the country because, people are one thing to say higher taxation. Another thing to say, if you are sick and you may have a life-threatening illness or your family may have a life-threatening illness, that you can't go and spend your money to try and save them if you can.
Sure.
Obviously, it applies to a small proportion of the country that can do that. But unfortunately, that's also the proportion of the country that pays the taxes.
Exactly. Yeah, certainly is. Viv, thank you so much. We certainly will have a deeper conversation from the likes of Discovery, the likes of Aspen will certainly come out with a few more words on that. But thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Viv Govender there joining us live here at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, coming through from Rand Swiss there. Well, that is the market picture, pretty much unmoved really for the most part, but that Rand is certainly the one to look out for. More than 1%, 1.2% lost then against the US dollar, 1.8% lost as well then against the British pound, more than 1% as well then against the euro. So certainly quite a lot being impacted when it comes to the local currency. We'll certainly find out a little bit more as to what is moving it. Of course, the likes of Moody's are certainly on tenterhooks, and who knows what might happen. What we'll talk about that right after the short break. My colleague Nzinga Qunta joining you right after this. Do stay tuned.